This is a Hog Sports Network podcast. The Hog Sports Network presents the basketball podcast of Mid-America, the premier Arkansas hoops podcast covering the Razorbacks men's and women's teams. Here's your host, WholeHogSports.com basketball analyst Scotty Bordelon.
Welcome into the basketball podcast of Mid-America. It is October 24th, and Arkansas basketball is inside 2 weeks from playing its season opener and kicking off the fifth season under Eric Musselman. I'm Scotty Bordelon of WholeHogSports.com, and I'm happy, as always, to begin another season of this podcast alongside Bob Holt of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, Ethan Westerman, and Andrew Joe of Whole Hog Sports. This is our season preview episode. I'm, like most people probably, I'm glad this time of the year is here. We'll obviously get into a lot of the things going on with Arkansas and Eric's program. We'll hit on the women's team too. There's really no one better to talk about that team with than Ethan right now. Last week, me and Bob and Ethan were down in Birmingham for SEC men's and women's basketball media day. Before we get into Arkansas playing its first exhibition against UT Tyler last week, and I guess we'll preview the Purdue game too. That's kind of a big deal going on this weekend, I would think. What were some of y'all's takeaways from Birmingham? And Bob, did we learn anything? Ethan, did we learn anything about, Arkansas's teams? And did we learn anything down there other than Chris Beard knows where to eat in Little Rock? Like he's the guy to go to.
I don't know. I mean, there were no big surprises to me. It was interesting, to see. I guess what impresses me, I think it speaks well to basketball in the state of Arkansas. You had Devo Davis there for Arkansas from Jacksonville. Connor Vanover was there with Missouri from Little Rock. Alan Flanagan was there with Ole Miss from Little Rock. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anybody, but to me, that's pretty impressive. You're talking about, 20-some SEC players, and three of them are from Arkansas. So I thought that was kind of cool. I think we learned the SEC is, going to be loaded for bear again. I think the polls, teams will go up and down in and out of the polls at times, but 5 SEC teams are ranked in the preseason AP and coaches polls, and that matches, I think, or not matches, that's more than any other league. So I think that speaks to, obviously it's not just a football league anymore, a baseball league, but basketball is very powerful in the SEC as well.
I think we learned too that Dennis Gates wanted to bring his whole team, or he would have if he could have. Would he bring 4 guys down to Birmingham?
I think it was 4, yes. And
Connor yeah, go ahead.
Well, I heard someone from another school say, well, I don't know how they get away with that or something. Like, they would have brought more guys too. So I don't know how that works. But
Connor's apparently wearing number 75 this year I guess that's just a tribute to, I guess he's taller than he was when he was here. I guess they got him listed 6'7" now.
Yeah, I don't know if he's honestly taller. I was asking him, like, have you grown? And he was like, well, you play with your shoes on, right? So I think it was the ORU where they started calling him 7'5". Excuse me. So I guess he didn't want to contradict that. So I honestly don't know if he's growing taller, but is there a big difference between 7'3" and 7'5"? I guess was Zach Edie. We'll see. I think he's listed 7'4".
Ethan, how was your experience down there? I know you got some good one-on-one time with Mike Neubert for a podcast. What kind of came out of that conversation with him?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't any surprise for me, anything we talked about. It was more or less, you can just tell, like, the excitement that it finally feels like we're kind of here. Like, it's for a while been like, oh, season's around the corner. But it was, talking to him this time, it was kind of like, oh, there's a game in about 3 weeks, a little under 3 weeks from whenever we talked to him down there. But really the main thing that stood out for me from both days down there, I mean, of course, for the men's, you and Bob were out there, and I was just kind of watching it on TV. But then even in the women's too, it was just, I think the quality of coaches right now in the SEC is just what stands out to me, because there was never any like, oh, who's this, who's that. It was just one after another. You're like, oh, wow, we got a big name coming up here to talk right now. I think that was kind of my biggest takeaway right now, is it's just like, I don't know if there's any other men's or women's side, like a league right now in the nation that you could just have that much quality of coaches one after another. I know on the men's side, there were some funny pictures of Eric and Nate Oates talking afterwards.
Yeah,
it's just things like that. And then on the women's side, it was I mean, Dawn Staley walked in and it was just like all of a sudden everybody just gets on a huddle and just starts chatting it up. It's just like I think that there's some, if not friendships among league coaches, a lot of respect right now. So that's kind of what stood out to me is just I think there's everybody on both sides, men's and women's, knows that there's a lot of good coaches right now and they have a lot of respect for each other. And it was pretty fun for us, I think, just to be treated to, and it's so funny, just kind of the room that we're in. It's so informal, but I mean, it probably looks formal on TV to everybody, but it's really an informal feel in there. So it was just kind of cool to have that time talking with those coaches.
For sure. And I remember during the Women's Day, I came over and finished my cover story on Trevor Brazil, and LSU's time was about to start in that main ballroom. And right outside the room, it's almost like the noise level went up 2 or 3 times when Kim Mulkey and the LSU's players walked in. Like it was like they legitimately drew a crowd when they walked in. Like everybody was wanting to talk to them or take a picture with them. So yeah, the star power in the league, I think, on both sides with the men's and women's is it's pretty impressive. And I think there's like some new faces or same faces in new places, like with Alan Flanagan. I think that could make, and Chris Beard, back in the league. I think that's going to make for really interesting year in the SEC for sure. Wanted to get to Arkansas's first exhibition against UT Tyler. Arkansas had no issues with that game whatsoever, which was probably a little bit new for El Ellis, I would think. I went back. I'm writing a story on him for our college basketball preview tab that'll come out right before the season opener. And he lost to Lenore Ryan by double figures last year in their first game. And then I can't remember who Louisville played in its second exhibition, but they squeaked out a win, like too close for comfort, when you're playing an exhibition. The crowd was really good the other night. It was probably about twice as big as I was expecting. But, homecoming weekend, the night before a home football game, was a perfect time for people to just be like, hey, I'll go watch this team play. 92-39. I think Arkansas gave up 12 points in the first half. Defensively, they were really good. Defensively, like I wrote my game story, like defense fueled everything. As they gave up 12 points in the first half. I think UT Tyler ended up 1 of 20 from 3 for the game, turned the ball over 20 times. Again, it's a Division II school, but sometimes you see these Division I teams, SEC teams, Power 5 teams struggle in games like this, but Arkansas just really didn't. I was most impressed, I think, with El Ellis. Looks like he's about ready to run the show. I think him and Devo are going to be one of the more intriguing duos, I think, to keep an eye on, because you feel really good about both of those guys handling the ball, being able to lead a team, especially Devo. But I think El is kind of up to speed with what Eric wants here. El finished with 9 points, 3 boards, 4 assists, 4 steals, didn't turn the ball over. I think in 16 or 17 minutes, they limited him a little bit, which I totally understand. And then Devo had 9 and 7, like he led the team. I think he had a game high in rebounds. Defensive intensity is just, it's there. What were y'all's takeaways from the game? I know I didn't even hit on Pinion Battle, Davenport shooting it pretty well. And then Trevor Brazil, got on the floor and looked like himself in a couple of different stretches. But what were y'all's takeaways from the first exhibition?
Yeah, just like you said, the defense. I mean, I don't care who you're playing. If you hold somebody 12 points, if you're playing a junior high team, that's pretty impressive. I had to double check the score because I remember I wrote 93-39. I was thinking, do they hold it?
Yeah, like 29? They got palindromed.
Yeah, like they got so they actually scored whatever 39 minus 12 is. What is that? 27. They actually got 27 points in the second half. How did that happen?
Look at them go.
Yeah, the defense was really good. And like I said, it was good to see Trevor Brazil. I remember we talked to him Wednesday at media day, and I asked him if he was going to play Friday night, and he wasn't sure. He wasn't saying like he wasn't going to play. And Eric had said, well, that's kind of going to be up to how he feels and how practice goes tomorrow. And they got out there and played 19 minutes, which Eric said after the game that they were talking about maybe playing him, I think 4 to 7 minutes in each half. So he played a lot of minutes. And at first he got out there, he looked a little tentative. I guess he'd been scrimmaging some, but he lost the ball. He had a couple shots that didn't look real good, and then he had a nice kind of swoop drive using his length. And then the second half is when he really looked like his old self on a play. I think it was Davenport missed a three, and he went in there and skied for a rebound and brought it down, gathered himself, and went up real strong. So that's the Trevor Brazile we got used to seeing last year before he got hurt. So that was obviously something that stood out, a lot.
Ethan and Andrew, you guys, y'all split up charting shots defended by each Arkansas player. Anything from that jump out? I think maybe what stood out to me, and it kind of matched what I think I was seeing. Sometimes I think my eyes can lie to me, but Chandler Lawson didn't allow a bucket on 7 shots that he defended. Trevor Brazile 1 for 6. L. Ellis and Devo were both 0 for 3. You saw some good stuff defensively, I thought, just contesting shots, not even getting into the, defensive rotations and, digging down to, try to take the ball from a big who's putting the ball on the floor. What were some of y'all's thoughts on Arkansas defensively, and what do y'all think this team's defensive potential might be?
It was kind of funny tracking those shots because Arkansas was swarming so much defensively. It just felt like nothing came easy for UT Tyler. And it was funny tracking it because there were some guys, like I think maybe Makai Mitchell, it was like 3 for 4 on him or something, but all of those makes were just kind of bullcrap makes. Like they were like, none of them I was like, yeah, that was just bad defense.
Yeah,
like
that was a legit basketball shot.
Yeah, it was funny tracking them because even the makes that they had, it was like, I gotta put this on somebody's chart as a shot made. But I mean, it was like all contested. It felt like there were, I think, maybe 3 or 4 shots the whole game, and I'm talking putbacks and just like on the perimeter or something that were just uncontested, which that's pretty impressive in my opinion. I mean, I haven't charted shots like that before, so maybe that's not too out of the normal, but I feel like it's probably pretty out of the normal to only have 4 uncontested in a game, including those putbacks. Yeah, the team just felt like it was swarming defensively. I really was impressed with Caliph Battle. I know he's been hurt, and so I didn't really know what to expect from him. I didn't even know if he was going to play. I don't think anybody did, but it seemed like he was maybe the best on-ball defender out there. He was just super in their face, super like moved his feet well, which is just ironic because he's had foot problem. But yeah, I just thought that like any Eric Musselman team is gonna pride itself on defense, and especially with just moving well and not giving up the middle, getting their hands high on closeouts and stuff. I just think that they were really playing fundamental. And Bob said, anytime you hold somebody to 12 points and a half, I don't care who you're playing, but that's impressive. So, yeah, I thought defensively they looked really good. And offensively, it felt like what you said with like L. Ellis just getting the hot start. It's like once they got something going on offense, it was like it didn't stop. It kind of at the beginning was a little slow, but once L. Ellis started putting the ball in, they were doing what you want to do. They were playing good offense and matching it with good defense. It was a really complete win. I get it. It's an exhibition, but it was a really complete exhibition win.
And I think it was important probably for L. And I'm starting this feature on him with, they got through the handshake line. They're walking toward the tunnel to take them back to their locker room. But when he gets about right across from Arkansas's bench, he takes his headband off and starts dancing because he lost to Lenore Ryan last year. And in that loss to Lenore Ryan, he had 2 points, turned the ball over like 4 times, was 1 of 7 from the floor. So I think L was kind of feeling himself, and I think he's really excited to be playing with a more superiorly talented group of guys around him, which I think in turn is going to make him more efficient. And then it'll not even look like, he'll probably become, the playmaker that he wants to be. But I think anytime L starts smiling or dancing or whatever, I think it's a pretty good sign that he feels like he's where he's supposed to be, where he needs to be. Another guy defensively, I didn't even mention Tremont Mark held his matchup 0 for 4. I think he had one guy maybe pushed his luck a little bit and tried to drive by him and got his shot swatted, kicked off a break. I think Devo ended up finding Caliph Battle for a layup. I think that right there is the kind of stuff that Tremont Mark can do. And then another thing is, he gets a dunk and a three, in that 14-2 run where he teamed up with Joseph Pinion early in the second half. And you look at the stat sheet, all of a sudden Tremont Marks in double figures with 10 points, and he's playing pretty good defense for you too. I think Tremont is, I don't want to say he's going to be sneaky good for this team, but he's just, I don't know, he's probably just going to quietly be pretty good most of the time, which kind of brings me to my next point. I feel really good about the Devo L. Ellis backcourt duo because you've got two guys that you really trust to initiate offense. And I think maybe in a pinch, or maybe you can even just experiment with this, but Tremont can maybe bring the ball up too. So you got, I feel like those are your top three guys. Would y'all agree? Those are maybe your top three guards at this point. How do you find playing time for Jeremiah Davenport, Caleb Battle, and Joseph Pinion when those three guys have shot the ball in the preseason the way that they have? Like what's going to be maybe the determining factor for who gets those minutes? Because I mean, we've obviously seen that, Eric normally doesn't play more than 8 or 9 guys, but you feel like that's six guards that you feel really good about playing. What do you think is going to be maybe the determining factor for those guys? Is it consistency, or maybe is it, I guess it kind of might boil down to who's locked in defensively?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, obviously, you think about Davenport being a shooter and some of those other guys, Joseph, but they're going to have to do it on the defensive end too. It's also, especially after last year, the last couple of years, really, it's nice to have guys that you feel like you can start or bring off the bench. You can knock down some threes. I mean, if they're struggling against the zone, or maybe somebody just having an off night or getting in foul trouble, I mean, it's nice to have that kind of depth. They don't really have to depend on 1 or 2 guys, or they shouldn't have to. And I think the competition also is just going to push everybody. I don't think anybody's going to be out there coasting or cruising. I mean, I think they know they better get after it if they want to get their minutes, So I think it's a good situation. It's a good problem to have, trying to work that many guys, into the lineup.
Yeah, it seems like every season we come into basketball season trying to figure out a rotation, and it's like they just have too many guys for a rotation spot. And I mean, like Bob said, it's a good problem to have, and it doesn't seem like Eric Musselman's worried about it. He was asked about how he's going to distribute minutes or if he's losing sleep over figuring out his rotation, and I think his response was not at all, because he's in the gym with them. He's lifting weights, he's running the treadmill, and so I think that's going to ultimately what it's going to boil down to is who's putting in the work outside of just their slotted practice time, and who's putting in extra work and getting shots up in the gym and doing all the extra stuff. Because I mean, you go down the list 1 through 12, they're all talented players and they all are going to perform in the minutes that they get. It's just a question of if they get the minutes.
One thing that I think that Eric has done really well since he got here is just like I feel like every game is kind of its own game. It takes on its own feel, and he like rides whatever's best for that game. So I think having a bunch of streaky shooters like he has now, it is a luxury. It's like, you have those guys you mentioned like Devo and L. Ellis. It'll probably be pretty consistent and their game translates to any game you're in. But whenever you have a Pinion or a Davenport that are streaky shooters, it's kind of like, I mean, you saw it this past year with Joseph. It's like there were some games that he got to play a lot because he was knocking down shots. I think because you have that luxury now of multiple guys who can shoot, it might be one of those things that it's kind of a game by game. If you go in there and, it was an exhibition this past week. So I think, Joseph missed his first 3 threes. I think Jeremiah might have missed his first 1 or 2. It's like you might not have that exact luxury during the season. Because if another guy's on, I could see Eric being like, he's on this game, I'm riding my hot hand and staying with him. So I think the word we keep on bringing up is luxury, though. I mean, it's early in his career, Isaiah Joe and Mason Jones were kind of your two that you're like, they can fill it up from deep and we need them on the court kind of at all times. So you kind of had to just ride out any shooting slump. Right now, it's like you have options. If a guy's not on one day, you can put somebody else in and maybe it's going to be their day. So I think that, I think all of them will get to play. It's just a matter of what game, what situation, and maybe there's 1 or 2 of them that prove that they're not just a streaky shooter, that they can be a consistently good shooter, and then they earn the majority of the minutes. It's just the season and each game will take on its own feel, I think.
Put it on a banner. Every game takes on its own identity. Hang it in the rafters next to some of the other retired numbers. I think or put it on the ribbon boards. Like when you instead of the stats at some point, like get your advertisements off the ribbon boards and then just put every game takes on its own identity. That's been Eric's go-to saying since he's been here. Another guy that I wanted to kind of bounce some stuff off of you guys with is Chandler Lawson. He was the last guy, I believe, that Arkansas signed out of the transfer portal. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's right. Got here late, and I wrote in my rotation projection column for HI, I think it was, maybe a month and a half ago at this point. I wrote that he was going to be in a group of 4 guys who were fighting for minutes with Layden Blocker, Bayfall, and Denaje Harris. And I said Lawson was going to be down there fighting for minutes because he's got here late, and a lot of times when you come into a program where you're kind of behind in a program like Eric's, like you've got a lot of work to do some catching up. But this kid and his 7'7" wingspan and his motor and his ability to step out and knock down a 3, like we saw early in that UT Tyler game, like he knocked down a 3, which is what they want. And it's super interesting to me because I honestly didn't think that he had that in him. I don't want that to be a slight to him. I thought he was kind of more of a rim running defense first type guy. But if he can do that and use that length to his advantage, man, it might be kind of hard to keep him off the floor, especially early in the year. And then if he plays those early minutes well, he could be, I don't know. I don't want to put any pressure on him at all. And, if there is any pressure, he's putting it on himself. But I think he could be a guy that really helps this team in certain games, you know what I mean? And I asked Trevin Brazil that the other night, and he was like, man, it's not even a question. Yeah, he's going to help us. Just thoughts on Chandler Lawson, where he might fit into that front court, because you've got TB, Jalen Graham, when he's healthy and not dealing with back spasms and stuff, he can give you offense. I think it's just kind of the dirty work stuff and the rebounding in traffic, not turning the ball over when you're double teamed. That kind of stuff. And I think what you're going to get with Mekhi Mitchell. But where might Chandler Lawson fit in with this group? Because I think he gives you a lot of length, and you want to play fast. You're 7'7", and you got a 7'7" wingspan, and you're 6'8" already. You can get up and down the floor pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it was a nice late pickup when they didn't get the Nelson kid from, I guess, South Dakota State, who ended up going to Alabama. I think Arkansas was in on him, but he came from Memphis, which is, pretty high level basketball, NCAA tournament team. And, the thing I liked was he hit that 3, but then he didn't shoot 5 others, right?
Right.
And the ball doesn't seem to stick with him. He moves the ball pretty well. I think he knows he's not the main offensive weapon out there. It doesn't mean he can't knock down some shots, but he's out there, I think, to move the ball, play good defense. They say runs the floor well, very athletic. Can see him finishing on breaks really well. So, he's just a really nice complementary piece that, they got late in the process. And a lot of times you don't get a guy that good that late. So I think he's a good player Nolan Richie used to talk about glue guys, I think he's a guy that can just, fit into the rotation and doesn't hog the ball or anything. It seems like he has a lot of good qualities.
Yeah, I was talking to him at Arkansas's media day, or I guess after we watched one of their practices, the first full week of practice. And he comes from a basketball family. I think he's had 3 other brothers in his family play for Memphis, and I think a couple of them have played elsewhere. Basketball just kind of runs in his family, so it's not new to him. I think terminology, I don't think it's foreign to him, even coming from Memphis into a new program. He was saying, he told me he thought, some of the things that Penny Hardaway taught him at Memphis are really going to be beneficial for him here. But, he said the first week was kind of rough, but once you kind of pick up on things, understand what the coaches want, I think you can, just like Sam Pittman says all the time, a guy plays faster when he really knows what he's doing, instead of, maybe he's playing a step slow or a half step slow because he's just processing things. Really interesting piece to me. I think, I don't know that maybe I find myself wondering if I'm making too much of what he's done in the preseason, but I mean, it was Eric that told us that he's a kid that's been all in, since he got here. That's kind of their motto for the year. He's been all in. He's doing the little things that, it takes to move up on the depth chart and maybe into a rotation spot. But again, I think it might be one of those game by game things. Real quick, areas of concern with this team. Have we seen enough to maybe identify areas of concern at this point? Ethan, you can go ahead if you got something.
I'd say honestly, just being a streaky shooting team is an area of concern, because how many threes did they take the other night? 34 or something?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, it was upwards of 30 for sure.
If you're shooting that many, number one, I just think Eric would make the adjustments in game if they're not hitting any, they stop shooting threes. But just being a streaky shooting team, you can sometimes shoot yourself out of a game. So I guess that would be an area of concern. But really, for me, it's this Saturday is going to be whenever I'll be able to give you real areas of concern, because it was just such a solid win on last week. I get it. It was an exhibition, but they just looked really good it was hard to nitpick. Maybe a couple areas of concern would just be health. I mean, we just still don't know. Brazil, like Bob said, he looked, whenever he first got in there, a little bit timid. Didn't look right at first, but he got more into it. So I guess right now my two concerns would just be, if you're going to be a streaky shooting team, will you make the adjustment to, if you're off, to find points elsewhere, and the team's health?
Yeah, I think my main area of concern for this team would be the rebounding potential for this team, just because, like you said, the volume that they shot with against UT Tyler can obviously lead to a lot of misses, and you're going to need to grab those misses against better competition. You're not going to get to play a D2 school in the regular season. And I think you mentioned Chandler Lawson earlier, and I think that's where he comes in, because he's kind of a seamless fit with Arkansas's offense, because you can't have 5 primary scorers out there on the floor at one point. And L. Ellis is going to get his shots. Devo Davis is going to take his shots. Trevor Brazile and Khalif Battle are all going to have the ball in their hands. And that's where you need a guy like Chandler Lawson to do the little things, rebound the ball and defend well. And so I think he might see an increased role than what was previously anticipated, just because he can do those little things. And then you obviously have Makai Mitchell, who is, I would say, a solid rebounder, but I wouldn't say is elite on the glass. And so I think you need guys like Makai Mitchell and Jalen Graham to up their production on the boards a little bit. And that would probably be the one area of concern I would have going into the season.
When I talked to Seth Greenberg at SEC Media Day the other day, I asked him that same question. I was like, do you have any concerns about this team? And he said, consistently taking care of the ball and consistently shooting it. Shooting the other night, like Joseph, like the guys that you wanted taking threes, I felt like took them. Like, I'm pretty comfortable with L at this point. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing a photo shoot with Trevor Brazile, and L is on the other end, and I bet I could count the misses on one hand. I mean, he's not going against defense or live defense or anything like that, but shooting it well. And then Pinion, Davenport, Battle, those guys, Devo. I mean, I feel like we forget about Devo sometimes when, after Eric brought in a few guys from the portal that can shoot. But from a ball handling standpoint, if you take away Trevor Brazile and Bay Fall from that exhibition, Arkansas had 2 turnovers in the game. Like, the guards were really good, valued possession a lot. I get it's a D2 team, but sometimes in those games like that, you can get a little bit careless because you know how much better you are than the other team. But that wasn't really a concern the other day. We'll see I guess that'll be something to look forward to this weekend. All right, let's get into this weekend's game against Purdue. In Bud Walton, 3:00. The game will be available for streaming on SEC Network Plus. I love that because I can go back afterward and rewatch it and chart stuff. Be a good time. I can nerd out on some of those numbers and stuff. But Purdue in the AP polls ranked 3rd. In the coaches poll, they were ranked 2nd in the preseason. They've got the game's greatest mismatch in Zach Edey, 7'4", 300 pounds. Bob, if you're Eric Musselman, how are you preparing for Zach Edey, and would your strategy involve putting Cade Arbogast on Lawson Blake's shoulders?
I don't know. I've been thinking about that because Arkansas's obviously got some height with Trevin and Makai and Jalen Graham. They got some 6'10" guys, but I mean, this guy's 7'4" and he's built like a aircraft carrier. That's what Al McGuire used to call the big guys back in the day. The old Marquette coach, who was a longtime NBC announcer. But I don't know, because we know Eric's a man-to-man guy, and I really can't see him going zone. But I do wonder if maybe number one is you have some big guys mean, even a guy like Chandler Lawson, I mean, he's quick. So, I mean, Edie, he's a very talented player of the year, all that. But, he was not going to be a high NBA draft pick. So he still has, so he's not, Shaquille O'Neal or whoever. I'm not knocking his game, obviously, but so I think maybe Arkansas they can run some different guys at him. They can maybe do some traps, some quickness, try to deny him the ball, maybe try to frustrate him. I'm sure Eric's looked at all the Big Ten teams that did a good job on him. And
Just look at the Fairleigh Dickinson tape from March.
Well, that's all you got to do, man. Yeah, and but it's an exhibition game, but I make no mistake, Eric wants to win this, and he's going to play, guys. No, he's not going to play like it's the Final Four, but I think he really wants to have a good showing for the fans. I think he understands with the way football's struggling that the fans could use an injection of enthusiasm. I don't think he'd say that, but I think that's the case. And there's no football this weekend, and so basketball takes center stage. So I think this is a really big game for the Razorbacks and Eric. It's an exhibition game, and they got pounded at Texas last year, and obviously they still went to the Sweet 16. But I think this is kind of a statement game maybe for this new group of Razorbacks and the returnees, obviously, too.
For sure. In addition to Zach Edey, Purdue has Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith back. Lawyer made a team high 59 threes last year, and Braden Smith led the team with over 150 assists. So the backcourt matchup, I think, is going to be really intriguing to watch, maybe more so than what we're seeing around the rim. And it might get pretty tough, rough and tough in there. Going to be really interested to see how Arkansas plans for Zach Edey. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, he's just like 7'4", 300 pounds. Like you can't simulate that in practice. Like football coaches all the time talk about preparing for a guy who's got elite speed. So maybe you don't have a guy who's got that elite speed, so it's really hard to prepare for. I mean, you got to prepare for him offensively and defensively, and it's a good thing Eric's coaching this team. I don't know how I would go about it other than maybe put some of those pads on your arms and then put them straight up in the air and kind of simulate that standing reach that he has. Again, Arkansas, Purdue on Saturday at 3:00 in Bud Walton Arena. Should be a fun one. Expecting a big crowd after the solid crowd for the UT Tyler game. And like Bob said, no Arkansas football this weekend. So you can watch this exhibition on SEC Network Plus. So all you need to do is just pull up the ESPN app or watch ESPN to get it. For Bob Holt, Andrew Joseph, and Ethan Westerman, I'm Scotty Borderline. We appreciate you tuning in. But before we go, I'm going to throw it to an interview that I did with Brian Neubert of blackandgold.com, which is part of the On3 network. Thank you guys again for joining in, and we will be back with another episode next week, recapping the Purdue exhibition. I'd like to welcome into the show Brian Neubert of goldandblack.com, which does a great job covering Purdue sports for on3sports.com. Brian, I appreciate you making some time this week. How are things where you are?
They are good. They're good. The weather's not freezing yet, so that's always a positive thing this time of year. Getting ready to be busy here in the next couple of weeks.
For sure. I know when we were trying to set up a time to talk this week, you mentioned you're coming in Friday to cover the game as well. Have you ever been to Arkansas before, and just kind of what are your expectations for the weekend?
I have never been to Arkansas. It's one of about a half a dozen states I can check off the list now that I've never been to. Purdue's got to get me to the Dakotas one day. I'm not counting Mississippi. I was there for like 5 minutes one time when I was in New Orleans. So Arkansas is one of the few states I have never been to. So looking forward to checking it out. I've heard good things about the arena. I've heard good things about the environment, and looking forward to it.
For sure. I think you'll probably be in for a pretty good environment this weekend. The football team's really struggling. They're off this week, so it kind of falls on a perfect weekend. Getting into Purdue a little bit, what are some of the top stories or storylines for this new Matt Painter team?
Yeah, so obviously, they were one of the best teams in college basketball last season. Their season ultimately wound up being defined by the fact that they didn't have any NCAA tournament success. They were the second team ever to get the second 1 seed ever knocked out by a 16 in the first round, and that sort of cast kind of a dark cloud over their whole season. And it's going to be the story that kind of follows them around all season this year until they have a
Right.
chance to dispel it in March. But they were really good last year, obviously, and they have pretty much everything important back. I think there's definitely a world where they can be a better team this year than they were last year. Obviously, they've got the National Player of the Year and Zach Edey back. He's, the most influential player in college basketball, if not the best player in college basketball, probably both, based on what he did last season. They've got some pretty talented guys back from or coming in this season who are more athletic than anything Purdue had last season. Whether they're ready or not is going to be the question. And I think that Purdue kind of got a sneaky pickup in the transfer market that no one's really talking about. In Southern Illinois, Lance Jones. I think he's a guy who can really make a big impact for them this year and balance out really something they don't have otherwise in terms of athleticism and kind of a defensive mindset in the backcourt. They've got two sophomore guards in Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer who are going to be really, really good.
I love those guys. Yeah.
Players. They were really good as freshmen right away. They had their ups and downs, but way more ups than downs. And I think everybody expects them to be much better players this year than they were last year. For such an established team, there's going to be some change. They're going to try to incorporate some more scoring in the form of a player named Trey Kaufman-Wren as best they can. He's kind of a true low post scorer. They're going to use him more at forward. So how that's going to coexist with Zach Edey on the floor, that's going to be a big question too. No guarantee it's going to work, but on paper at least, Purdue figures to be pretty good.
Yeah, I would say so. I think Eric, when we were talking to him in the off season, they've got Duke on the schedule after a few days after they come back from the Bahamas, and then obviously the Purdue game came out, and he was like, "Yeah, we're probably going to get two of the top three teams in the country, in their building, within a month of each other," and he was right on the money. I think they were 2 and 3 in the AP poll. How do you think Matt Painter is going to approach this game? Because obviously it's a big time preseason game, top 15 teams, but then again, it's kind of not. It's far from an end all be all game.
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent question because Purdue has had these close scrimmages before, and Purdue really doesn't care if it wins or not. This being kind of more of a game in a game-like environment, I think that's probably something that you probably put a little bit more stock in. But for Purdue, it's all about the experience. It's one thing Purdue's always tried to do with its scheduling early in the season, especially with its current personnel, is get pressured. He wants to give his team a lot of looks early in the season. And one thing, at times over the years, and I'm not just talking about this team this year or last year, but some of their teams that preceded it, they didn't handle backcourt pressure great. And I think, for that reason, they've tried to schedule West Virginia's and they've tried to schedule Cincinnati's, and now obviously Arkansas. I assume Arkansas. I don't know Arkansas great. I just know they lost Nick Smith and Anthony Black. But I assume they're still going to pressure. I assume they're still going to press and things like that. And that's, something he really values in the preseason too. So I think it's for Purdue, the goal, as I'm sure it is for Arkansas, is to get better. But I think you'd love to win. If you don't, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think he'll coach to win, but only to a point.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the pressure. Arkansas last week played UT Tyler in an exhibition, beat them 92-39. Like, it was never in doubt.
Mhm.
We did see a little bit of 2-2-1 full court type stuff, which don't really see just a whole lot. And then I think defensively, Eric feels pretty good about Devo Davis coming back. He was an all SEC defensive guy last year, and they got Tremont Mark from Houston. I think he feels like those two guys will be a really good defensive duo. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see that backcourt matchup with Lawyer and Braden Smith. How do you think maybe Devo Davis, Tremont Mark, how do you think maybe they'll match up with Purdue's backcourt? I think that outside of the obvious with 80, around the rim. I think that's obviously the most intriguing thing to me.
Yeah, well, what people typically try to do to Purdue, and what they're smart to do to Purdue, is they try to put a lot of heat on the guards to make sure they don't get those clean entries into Edie and things like that. I think though that um, people who play Purdue, probably starting with Arkansas this weekend, are going to look at what undid Purdue at times last season, and are probably going to try to make Purdue beat them with threes. Because when Purdue struggled last season, it was, including the Fairleigh Dickinson game in the NCAA tournament, when they were 5 of 26, shooting a lot of wide open threes. I think people are going to be more inclined to put a lot of people on Zach Edey, or really crowd the lane and make Purdue beat you with jumpers. Purdue's a skilled 3-point shooting team. It's a huge part of their formula. They've really put a lot of investment in 3-point shooting. Last year it didn't work. They were a 32% shooting team. They've got capable shooters. They just didn't shoot well. This year, I think they expect to shoot better, but they're going to have to prove it. And I would anticipate Arkansas, probably going down those lines, assuming that they're really, really preparing and coaching to win this game, which, knowing Eric Musselman, he probably is. And he should be. It's a home game for them. It's a pretty big event down there, I would have to think. But I think they're going to try to pressure Purdue's guards, and when they're in half court offense, I think they're going to try to make Purdue's guards beat them with threes. If they do, then Purdue's really hard to guard. They're really, really hard to guard. If they don't, then you can really, really take away from Zach Edey's effectiveness, because he's going to have two guys sitting in his lap all the time. That's kind of the bugaboo Purdue's got to get through here after last season, is they've got to shoot the ball better. It sounds like 9 times out of 10 you say something like that prior to a season, and it just sounds like oversimplification. But for Purdue,
Right.
It really is that simple. They've got to make threes, because when you're not making threes, you're really, really taking away from Zach Edey's value, and you're just making yourself really easy to guard.
Just on 80 a little bit more, obviously really intrigued by him. I made the joke earlier in the show that I don't know how Arkansas was going to simulate
You can't.
preparing for him. Oh,
Yeah,
and I
can't.
made the joke. It was like, are you going to put the walk-on guard on the walk-on forward shoulders to try to simulate the height and the standing reach and all that? But what's he been like for you to cover? And maybe what are some of the things he does, maybe just beyond being a mountain of a man, that kind of make him effective?
Well, I think people look at him and they just look at the dimensions, and there's kind of a punchline out there sometimes from fans of other Big Ten schools that he's only good because he's big. That's just not accurate. He's a really good basketball player. He's got great hands. He's got great feet. He moves better than you would ever expect, an office building to move.
Yeah.
He's really improved as a passer. He's only been playing basketball for like 6 years too. And so he should be getting better. He's got a nice shooting touch. He can shoot free throws. He's got a really, really good knack for getting his position, not giving up his position, and making tough catches, making tough shots over people. He's more explosive. He's more bouncy than you would think a guy that big would be. He was really good in pick and roll last year, which he never really had to do before at Purdue, because he was just that guy that just trotted down the floor, went to his spot, and just claimed it. But he's just kind of a freak, man. He averaged 30 minutes a game last year when he'd not played more than 19 or 20 before that, and didn't phase him. He was better at the end of games than he was at the start of games sometimes. And he's just a really good basketball player, and should be getting better. It's just a matter of, sometimes he's had to deal with some of the mental challenges of, getting fouled on every play and having to play through it. Sometimes he's had to deal with tricky matchups in terms of, people obviously want to pull him away from the basket, so they put him in ball screens and things like that. Or if there's a big guy who can shoot, they'll try to drag him away from the basket. So there's some give and take to playing big, but he's a great offensive player. He's one of the best defensive rebounders in college basketball. He really made a huge jump last season in terms of his rim protection, his interior defense, even though he's not like a prototypical shot blocker, like a guy who's, just really long and really explosive off the floor, things like that. He's just I've never seen anything like it at Purdue or really anywhere. You can't simulate him in practice. You just can't. And that's sort of one of those things where, like, you can watch film and what you see on film and then what you see when you go out there for warm-ups, what you see in that first 5 minutes of the game, they're two very, very different things.
For sure. I'm always kind of interested to get thoughts on Arkansas from those outside the state, maybe the SEC footprint. So I guess, like, what from your perspective is maybe the perception of Eric Musselman's program at this point?
I know he can really recruit, and he's really gotten some dudes down there. And I know they want to play a lot of pressure and, things like that. And I saw them play in Indiana a couple of years ago. I saw his Nevada teams play. One of Purdue's former players, Kendall Stevens, transferred to Nevada.
That's right. Yeah. Eric
few
talks
years
about him
back.
quite a bit.
Yeah, I paid kind of loose attention to them after that, and I know he's a good postseason coach. He's a good regular season coach. He's a high pressure guy. He's a high energy guy. Obviously, a colorful personality. Hopefully, he'll keep his shirt on Saturday. But
No guarantees.
I know he's really good with his players. I know, talking to Kendall Stevens' family after he transferred, I know they were really touched, for lack of a better term, by the personal relationship he tried to build with all his guys, and kind of things like that. So he's a great coach, gets great players, and that's a big part of the job, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I want to thank you again for your time, man. Looking forward to the weekend, and appreciate you joining the show and get us ready for Saturday's game. You guys can find Brian's work at goldandblack.com. Brian, appreciate your time, man. Looking forward to meeting you on Saturday.
No problem at all, Scotty. We'll see you Saturday.
The proceeding has been a production of the Hog Sports Network. Look for our daily podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. For more Razorbacks coverage, go to wholehogsports.com or follow the Hog Sports Network reporters on social media.